Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we are excited to have on the show Amanda Woomer of the website spookeats.com. Amanda is a travel buff, foodie, and paranormal investigator and an author. She travels around the country to haunted restaurants, cafes, inns, and bed and breakfasts in search of great food and spirits of all kinds, blogging her adventures along the way. So you're going to get to know her today, and we're most happy to have her on the show. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and thanks again for tuning in. It's always exciting to have you guys with us. And we always have fun with the paranormal, so we're really looking forward to today's show. We have another great show coming up next week, which is Carrie Calvis, and she's going to be doing a show on numerology. So that's the ability to predict things and divine things using numbers. And so it's a fascinating thing, and she'll be talking about what got her into that and some of her unique methods that she's developed. So join us for that if you're interested in all that kind of stuff. And we've got all kinds of great shows coming up in May. So you can get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, as IXTH. And please, click and subscribe and comment. And we're pre-recording the show today, but we'll be on the live chat while it's premiering. So if you wanted to ask Krista and I anything, please do so. And we're going to have a lot of fun. So when you're on our website, if you want to buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi, that's awesome. It helps us cover our production cost a little bit. And we're always grateful for those of you who have contributed a little bit. And if you can't afford it, join us anyway. We love having all you guys. And also subscribe to our newsletter. And then one other quick announcement: in May, we are starting a series of tarot classes. And it's good for everybody from beginners who've never picked up a deck before to people that have been doing it for years and just want a whole new way of looking at it. It's really based heavily on Kabbalah. So if you're interested in taking that, it's going to be virtual on Zoom. Then get a hold of us and sign up. And it's going to be a very limited size. We like to have very small classes, so maybe about 8 or 10 people at the most. So that's about it for me. So I'm going to kick it back to you guys so we can get into the show. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You are now officially part of our paranormal family, which we hope will be international at some point.
I love it. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
And you're from the New York area, is that correct?
Yes, I'm from Buffalo, New York.
That's wonderful. So we always like to get to know our guests a little bit when they first come on the show. And I wanted to know what, to start it off, what led you to your interest in the paranormal, sort of your earliest paranormal memory.
So my sort of origin story goes back to when I was a little girl. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I saw a spirit. I was in my parents' house one night in bed, and I looked out into the hallway, and I saw an elderly woman out in the hallway, and she had a bathrobe on and slippers and crazy bedhead. And I remember she was walking through the hallway. She stopped and she turned and stared at me for a few seconds before continuing into what is now our linen closet. It only took me a few seconds to absolutely panic and scream for my mom. And she actually ran through the old woman. I watched her run through her, so she didn't see her at all. It was the only time I ever saw her. I don't feel like I grew up in a haunted house. It was the only sort of paranormal encounter I had, but it kind of set me on that path. I was very interested. I started reading books and watching documentaries. And of course, in the mid-2000s, all of the paranormal reality shows started coming out, and I was absolutely obsessed with them. Started going on ghost tours, and then started ghost hunting, and I'm here now. So all the way back to 1997 is my very first interaction with the paranormal.
Yeah, it's interesting. The younger crowd, younger than us, they have the TV shows that we didn't really have. We had like maybe the Twilight Zone or more of the entertainment shows. So That must have a certain effect to see, the shows and then to have your own experience and feel maybe that there's support for it, at least with the groups on TV.
And it's definitely, you have a love and hate relationship with the TV shows because they have kind of created this unrealistic expectation of what a paranormal investigation is actually like.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's brought the paranormal more so into mainstream mentality. So when you talk to someone about paranormal encounters or the fact that you're an investigator, you don't look too crazy, still a little bit just to keep things interesting. But I do think it's, in the last 15, 20 years, it's definitely become a bit more acceptable to be able to say that you believe in ghosts, you investigate the paranormal, you go to haunted locations. So for that, I am grateful for these shows, even though I like them, but I don't. I appreciate what they've done, but they kind of go too far sometimes. So it's definitely a love-hate relationship for me.
Sure, and I suppose it really depends on the individual people in the shows as well. Now, were your parents interested in the paranormal at all, or were they have an opinion about it?
So I always joke saying that I have kind of tainted my family. So I was raised the good old Christian girl where, the ghosts don't exist. If you're talking to a ghost, it's a demon and it's the devil trying to tempt you. And my dad is an ordained minister. And as I got a little bit older, I became a teenager and I was interested in this, and my brother was also interested in it. So slowly my parents started saying, all right, let's take them to Gettysburg. Let's take them to Salem, these cities in the States that are spooky. They have that spooky history. And over the years, I feel like I've like beaten it into them. And since the passing of my younger brother back in 2015, they've definitely opened up more to the idea of the paranormal and that maybe not everything is as cut and dry as Sunday school might teach you. My dad is still very skeptical, but open-minded. So I always say he's the Scully to my Mulder. He's always good to have around because he keeps you level-headed, but every so often something will happen and he can't explain it away. So that's the sort of thing that makes you scratch your head if he can't explain it. So they've definitely embraced it a bit more. But starting out, they were a little nervous for me and my soul, I guess. I don't know. But definitely, I mean, life changes you, events in life change you over time, and they've definitely been changed by that and more open to the idea of something more out there that we're not fully capable of understanding just yet, but we're in the process of figuring it out.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about your brother. I know we were talking about it before the show a little bit, and you had mentioned earlier on the show today that he was also interested in the paranormal. So have you felt him around since he passed, and do you see him since you have seen spirits in the past?
Absolutely. I always say that before he passed away, my interest in the paranormal was very innocent. Just a curiosity that I think a lot of people experience in regards to haunted locations in the paranormal. And then after he passed away, that curiosity definitely turned more into a passion for me. Like I kind of mentioned, I didn't have my belief system wasn't really accepting what Sunday school taught me, that when you die, you go to heaven, or if you're bad, you go to hell, and that's it. I definitely wanted to search for more proof of a potential life after death. So that's kind of why I started Spooky Eats, was to kind of create a haunted roadmap in a way of people being able to go to these locations and experience potentially the afterlife themselves and come to their own conclusions. And since I've really started actively exploring the paranormal, I've definitely experienced my brother. You have dreams where you can tell it's a dream with them and not of them. I've heard his voice on many occasions. And there's a specific building in Western New York where I am that it's an old theater that I was a member at for years. He was also a member. And many times we've interacted with him there. I have seen him with my own two eyes there. We've gotten photographs of him. We've gotten EVP of his voice. So he's definitely still around, which is very helpful for me. You know, a lot of people, when they lose a loved one, they do turn to their faith or perhaps alcohol. You know, there are different coping mechanisms. And for me, my coping mechanism was paranormal investigations. And it's still really the only thing that brings me any sense of comfort in regards to my personal loss and my grieving process.
That's wonderful. And I've done a show before and I've read the book Staying Connected by Rudolf Steiner. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but one of my friends recommended it when my mother died. And he's one of the few sort of esoteric teachers that really comes out and says we should stay connected with our loved ones and that we all have the ability. And he goes into in the book why it helps them that this relationship continues. And he also goes so far to say that, which I thought is fascinating, that is part of the evolution of humanity to be closer to the dead. And I don't know what that means exactly, but it seems like the interest in the paranormal is exploding. And I think that that's showing that maybe this is true, that there's some benefit for both the living and the dead to actually build these relationships.
I totally agree with that. You know, shortly after my brother passed away, obviously I was struggling, and he had pediatric cancer. So when he was in treatment, he had a psychiatrist working with him, and afterwards I talked to her, and she basically, I said, I'm not sleeping at night. I can't sleep. What should I do? And she recommended writing letters. And she said, she was the one that said to me, you know, just because he's not physically here anymore doesn't mean that your relationship is over. Write him letters, tell him about your day, ask him questions about what he's experiencing, what he's doing. If you have any theories about what life after death is like, share them with him. And that, to me, I filled journals and journals of these letters to him for the first few years after his death. And it was such a comfort to be able to keep this relationship going. And I really think, you know, throughout human history, death was a huge part of life. You know, not every child, you know, grew to be an adult. People died at very young ages. And only within like the last 100, 200 years has death kind of once again become like this taboo subject. Like we don't like to talk about it. It's something that we don't want to think about. And I think now we have this death positivity movement, and I think that's so helpful, you know, to make death a part of life. It's totally natural, perfectly natural. And I think, you know, by embracing it and accepting that it's here, it's not scary. So when you do go to a haunted location and you are interacting with the energy and these spirits of people who have passed away either a few years ago or 100 years ago, it shouldn't be scary because they're people. Just like me and you know, you're able to talk and, you know, potentially find answers about life and death and what comes next and what happens in between. So I have to look for that book because I think I would absolutely love it because I totally agree with it.
Yeah, Steiner has a very unique take on things, and he was the one that started biodynamic farming and the Waldorf schools, and I think he's around the early 1900s, and you probably would get a lot from it. I love that you wrote letters. That's so beautiful, and I hadn't really thought about that till maybe recently. I lost my brother when I was 17, and it
I'm
was
so
my
sorry.
I wouldn't say it was the only thing that started me, but kind of similar to you, I got really serious about wanting to know why he died, and in his case he was lost at sea, so we never had his body, and so that was another whole layer to it.
Oh my God.
And he was very special person. So I think that you know, like you, I'm grateful for what I got from it, but of course you would rather have the person and in life and not necessarily choose to go through these things in life. But you know, that is part of life, is all these lessons that we're thrown into against our will, you
Yeah.
know. And I mean, now I know that as I've gotten older, it's just part of life to have these things happen. And some people have a lot more than others. Some people have a lot at once. We all have to come to terms with death and loss, no matter who we are. And I think that in some ways, early on, if we're taught, let's say we don't go through a specific, maybe a pet we lose. That's a good way to have a lesson around loss and death, because of course children really feel that particularly harsh. I think we all do, but I know like little kids especially, because they're so close to their pets. So I really love the letter part. I think that's a great recommendation.
Yeah, it was very helpful.
So let's talk a little bit about how you came to Spook Eats, because the combination, I love it. I can see the travel part. Now you were talking about your parents taking you to places, and then the food part, going to haunted bars. I could imagine they would be haunted because of all the alcohol.
Spirits and spirits.
Right. So how did that come about? More just organically that you decided your interests, or?
Gosh, so basically, it was kind of mulling around in my head for a few years shortly after my brother passed away. And it mainly came from, again, me trying to find these haunted locations where I could try to do some research on, life after death. And I found that so many of the really famous locations that you're familiar with from television were really difficult to access for your average everyday person. I'm not part of a team. I'm not well known. I don't have a lot of money to spend on these places. So I found that it was very difficult for the paranormal to be accessible to your average everyday person. And that's when I turned to haunted hospitality. These hotels and restaurants and bars, they're already open to the general public. They want you to come and visit them. For the price of, a pint of beer and an appetizer, you could experience potentially the paranormal. And so many times these locations are so historic, especially bars I've found, that a lot of times they're some of the oldest buildings in a town or in an area. Sometimes they've also included, speakeasies or brothels. So you add that beautiful, I don't know, spiritual, I don't know. It's so spicy and just adds so much flavor to it, instead of it just being, an orphanage or a jail or a hospital. You have so much more energy. And a lot of times I've found that these locations are far more enjoyable to visit, both physically speaking, it's got heat and electricity and plumbing, which is huge. But then also the energy of the location. A lot of times these places were joyful places, and you had fun. You went to these places to celebrate and for special occasions. And I always say that, the really famous or infamous places that you hear about, they're very doom and gloom. It's a very heavy energy. I would say dark, but not dark as in evil, but just
Right.
a very dark and gloomy, which is very potent. But then on the flip side, you also have these locations like these hotels and these bars that the energy is just as powerful, but could be more enjoyable. And I feel like it leads to just as potent a haunting as the more negative locations. So my goal with Spook Eats was to kind of shed light on these locations, that they're historic, they have great food, you could potentially spend the night if you want, and they have these ghost stories. And a lot of times they are desperate to share these ghost stories. The staff and the owners want to share the history of these locations. So I always feel I'm not the only person that's ever lost a loved one and then questioned what comes next. Other people are on that journey as well. So here is a roadmap for you to go to these places and try to come to your own conclusions yourself, instead of just listening to what you might see on TV. So that's basically why I wanted to start Spook Eats. It's kind of been a little difficult with the pandemic. I haven't been able to travel anywhere. But once things are, safe once again, I can't wait to get back out there. And continue to explore these locations, because it's just been such a balm to my soul to be able to visit these locations and kind of start to find potential answers to my questions. And if I have these questions, I know other people do as well.
I love that. It's about going to places that are part of life too, like going back to the concept of death being part of life, and not always has to be the heavy murders or suicides, and which can be a little much. But I know that probably sells the television show a little bit.
Of course, because say happy places are not entertaining sometimes.
Well, hopefully that's going to change. I think it needs to on some level for another reason. So what was your first investigation that you remember, as far as one of a bar or restaurant?
So pre-Spook Eats, my first investigation of sorts was just Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. My family and I, we had a tape recorder to date ourselves. And we just went out into the battlefield. We actually stayed, the hotel we stayed at was the headquarters for Robert E. Lee. Since then, the hotel's been demolished and it's just the museum, which I think is good. Like, keep those two things kind of separated. And nothing really happened, but we had our recorder, and so that was pre-Spook Eats. But when I started Spook Eats, my first investigation, or place that I visited, I should say, was the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, which I always feel like was like the peak, and now I've gone to like some lesser known places, but that was one of the most famous ones. So that was my very first Spook Eats location, and I got to go to the bar. I reviewed the drinks and the food, and shared a little bit of the history. And that's the problem, not problem, but with Spook Eats, it's difficult because you really can't investigate while you're there because you're visiting during business hours. So every so often I am lucky enough where the owners will let me go up into the attic or down into the basement and do like a mini investigation. But a lot of times things get contaminated with people, walking around and talking. So with Spook Eats, it's more so visiting, reviewing the food and the experience and learning the history and interviewing the staff. And then outside of Spook Eats is where I can do investigations and actually kind of like get my hands dirty. And I love both experiences. They're just so different. And I'm hoping eventually to be able to get big enough, quote unquote, where I can actually ask places, can I stay after hours to actually investigate? But hasn't happened yet, so fingers crossed, maybe someday.
I think you're big enough already. I think you really, and I think just always ask people, because I know from a friend of mine who's a singer, and I forget the whole story, but I think she wanted to sing in the House of Blues when it was still there, and she just asked. And she wasn't really known, and she got to do it. And she says, I always ask. I said, you never know. All I can say is no. And I think that idea of just being pleasantly persistent with people, because I like the angle you come at. You come at, you're going to help their location because of the food and the drinks you're sort of, reviewing, and you're respecting them. And, so I think you definitely have a lot on your website already that shows that, to me, it's that you're a truly authentic investigator. You really want to do it because you enjoy it and you're passionate. And I think that you might be underselling yourself a little. But yeah, so I mean, that's just my opinion about it.
Habit that I.
So, and then are there any places you've been that you just particularly didn't feel the vibe for, that, as far as, it doesn't necessarily have to be scary, but they were not your favorite places, or you had just an unusually odd experience that you didn't want to go back?
So luckily, I've never had an experience that was terrifying, so frightening that I refused to go back. And for that, I'm grateful. If you experience kind of out in hindsight, I should have done this, and this. What I have found is that the locations that I am less likely to go back to usually have to do with the living and not the dead. So the people that run the location, whether they're just not authentic, or they're little, I don't know, rough around the edges, or they just don't want to talk about the haunted history. So I always say it's usually the living you have to worry about and not the dead, when I'm trying to convince people to not be, too nervous about, investigating the paranormal. And nothing against these locations, they were fine. But for me, there's just such a plethora of haunted locations all throughout the country that I have a very, very long spooky bucket list of places to go that before I would necessarily darken these people's doors again. So it's never the dead, it's usually the living.
So you've published a book called A Haunted Atlas of Western New York. Have you visited a lot of those places, or some of the places? How'd you put that together?
So I actually visited all of the locations in that book. That was my goal, was to, if not actually investigate these locations, at least go and visit it, experience it, kind of take in the energy of it. And basically, I've been writing since I was a little girl. I would write fiction for the longest time, and once I started Spook Eats, I really wanted to start writing and potentially publish something, have the nerve to have other people read my work. And I figured, I don't have a lot of money to travel someplace for an extended period of time to really get to know a location. So why not write about what I know? So that's why book number one was The Haunted Atlas of Western New York. It's in my neck of the woods, it's my backyard. Um, and I spent almost exactly a year researching it, traveling to these locations, photographing them, and I absolutely loved it because instead of having a really, wide look at something, I felt like it was a very deep, Western New York is not this huge area. And I really felt like I could like sink my teeth into the history of it and the folklore and the ghost stories. And again, that was the start of kind of the haunted roadmap idea of giving people coordinates, driving tours, walking tours, a spooky bucket list, the back of the book, where, my hope is that they take the book, they break the binding, they take notes in the margins, and they take this book with them on these adventures to, again, find their own answers to these questions about life and death. So I loved working on that. It's way bigger than I wanted it to be. It was like 300 some odd pages, and I was like, that's not going to fit in someone's back pocket. Like, that didn't work out. But it was book number one. I released it back in 2019, and it's, at least in Western New York, obviously, it has a great little following. I have a couple of local bookstores that I'm constantly restocking for them because people, especially with COVID, you really can't travel wide. So let's get to know it on a deeper level. And people have bought the book and really gotten to explore the haunted history of their backyard. So I absolutely loved working on it. I've done a few other books since then, but that one took forever. Mostly because it was my goal to go to all of these locations myself. All the photographs in there are taken by me. So yeah.
And how many locations are in the book?
There are over 130 locations.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. Some of them are just like roads. So not that impressive, but some of them were, old hospitals, old schools, cemeteries, restaurants, of course, that I had to throw those in. So basically any place that had even a lame ghost story where they're like, oh, people have weird feelings and they get orbs and photographs. And it's like, well, that's not as cool as a full body apparition, but I'm going to put it in there. And we even had like cryptids in there and like local legends. So I wanted to try to include everything, anything under the paranormal umbrella, whether it was, unexplained phenomena, Bigfoot, ghosts, curses, anything like that. So 136, I think, which made me mad. I was like, really? It could have been 135 or 140. It has to be 136. So
That's funny. That is one of the things I so enjoy about watching the good paranormal shows is the history part. And I was just thinking as you were describing this, what if we had in school, we were taught the paranormal history? Many of the kids would probably like that better, and it is interesting and often very touching. A lot of the stories.
And it just adds a personal touch to, like, I feel like history a lot of times, I'm a history nerd, so I don't feel this way, but I feel like other people could think like history, it's dusty and boring and it happened so long ago. Whereas if you add in that ghost story aspect, a lot of times it focuses on a certain individual or a group of people. So you kind of feel that personal connection with either a person involved in an urban legend or a group of people that are a part of this ghost story. So I am all for that. I'd be willing to teach that class.
I think it'd be great. I think you should. I love it. Now, we've had on this show, I think our first female investigators were Mystic Mitten. So we've talked about women in the paranormal and how they are very important, but sometimes overlooked or not supported on a larger level. So talk a little bit about your experience as a woman in the paranormal.
Oh gosh, luckily for me, most of my experiences have been great. As a solo researcher and sometimes investigator, I've never been subjected to any sort of sexism or any discrimination like that. But over the last few years, I've noticed, similar to Mystic Mitten, what they experienced was that women tend to be kind of overlooked in the paranormal, despite the fact that we are here. Um, and I was doing a different show about a year ago now, and I was talking about women in the paranormal, historically speaking. So I was talking about Catherine Crowe and Eleanor Sidgwick and even Lorraine Warren. We were talking about the whole spectrum of women in the paranormal, and I very quickly realized that people did not know who I was talking about, aside from Lorraine Warren, and I think that's only because of the Conjuring movies that have come out in recent years. Um, so that got me thinking that, people don't really know female paranormal investigators. If you ask someone to name a female investigator, they might be able to list a few, but not nearly as many as the men they would be able to list. So I actually recently just started an all-female paranormal journal that just released last month to highlight the work that these women are doing in the field, that it's absolutely fascinating. And we had women, working on the scientific end of things with gadgets and spirit communication and actual paranormal investigation. We had women who talked a bit about folklore and dark history. And then we also had women who work, in witchcraft and tarot. And it was just this beautiful patchwork quilt of these women coming together to share their areas of expertise. And I don't use that word lightly. A lot of people say there are no experts in the paranormal, but there were some women that were studying, EVP for the last 30 years. And that's a lot, like that's as long as some of these other women have been alive. So there's definitely an expertise that these women brought to the table. And I think I try not to make it a male versus female thing, because that's not the point. But I just want people to realize that the ladies are here just as much as the men. You see the male investigators in mainstream media on the television shows. They have all male shows, and most of the shows are made up of men. If you think of investigators, you'll think of a man. And it's just to shed light on these ladies and let everyone know that they're here as well, and they're working just as hard and investigating with just as much integrity and intelligence as the men that everyone already knows about.
Yeah, the journal you mentioned, I would love to get a copy. I'm going to order one. I love the title of it, the Feminine Macabre. So congratulations on getting the first issue out. That's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
So, and then also what I have noticed now, probably my earliest introduction to paranormal was the Omen House, and our friend Jeff and Kashmir. I met them early on. They're both investigators on their own. So my first experience was like a couple, and then, seeing them. So to me, maybe I thought there were some women, but I did notice on the shows, women usually had a specific role. They were the psychic. And that's fine. And in a way you could say, well, sometimes men are not included in that side of it all. They're not seen quite as naturally intuitive as women, which I think, again, is sort of a weird bias. I think there is some kind of truth to the whole mother intuition for their children. And I think that's a protective mechanism. So I think that's where it comes from originally. But I think men and women are equally intuitive and psychic. I don't think it's a gender thing myself. And that's from going to readers. So I think that it's probably going to change more, I think, because I think the technical side of women not being noticed is basically similar to the bias of girls in science and math. And we see that changing more and more. But it's still not, I think, on a public level, really hasn't really broken that ceiling yet. I mean, you can see it through Facebook and people, showing all the years where women have been in science and math and been doing it all along, but we just didn't know them. That's very similar. I'm always shocked about the stories I read. I say, oh my God, that's amazing. And so it's all about, and we go back to sort of history and everyone being included in history so that we see the whole shebang, and it's more interesting that way.
No, and I absolutely agree. And I feel like over the years, I feel like originally spiritualism and connecting with the other side was a very feminine female thing. The spiritualism movement was very closely linked to, women's right to vote and women's rights just in general. And then it kind of, I feel like with like the Society for Psychical Research, it kind of became more of like a man's world. And now I feel like it's starting to return more to the spiritual aspect of things. And I think just socially speaking, gender and sex norms are they're much more fluid now. A woman could be in STEM and a man can be a psychic or a witch, and it's not black or white anymore. There's this beautiful gray area. And I agree totally that I feel like hopefully over the next few years there's more give and take with these roles that people take in the paranormal, and that we'll see more male psychic mediums highlighted on these shows, or just in the community in general, and more ladies can be working with the gadgets, the portals, and the SB7s, and all the things, that the mechanical things that were more masculine. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it continues to evolve, because I feel like, not to be ironic, but I feel like the paranormal is like a living and breathing thing. It's constantly changing and constantly evolving. Nobody really knows what the heck is going on, so nothing can be set in stone. And I find that so exciting. I feel like the paranormal has changed so much in the last 10, 15 years, so I can't wait to see what the next 10 or 15 years hold for us.
Also, I would like to see more from different races. And you have the Ghost Brothers. I think they're the only two African American men on TV. I don't know. Maybe there's a smaller one, or people from other.
That's all I know.
Other races, because it's ghosts are in every culture. I'd like to see something more with the Chinese, or and I think that hopefully will happen. So there's almost like a little bit of a gap there too, in terms of at least the public shows and people that are investigating on a broader level, where I'm sure they're doing it in little small groups. I find on Instagram there's so many paranormal groups. It's really amazing, like doing their thing in their little town somewhere, and making pictures and doing all the investigation. I was really kind of happy about it, sort of.
I love like the more grassroots, like intimate sort of investigations that people are able to do. And again, I feel like you don't need to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on these expensive pieces of equipment. And that's why, like, I host public ghost hunts at the theater that I mentioned briefly a while ago. And it's a great way to just introduce the paranormal to people, because I feel like up until now, it's felt like the paranormal was reserved only for the people you see on TV. And now, especially with social media, you see all of these different groups: men, women, young, old, black, white, gay, straight, it doesn't matter. Getting their little pieces of equipment, whether they are spending all the expensive, for all the expensive gadgets out there, or something as simple as your phone with a flashlight and a camera and a voice recorder. It's so much more, it's like almost empowering in a way to see, because the paranormal should be accessible to everyone, not just the famous people we see on TV. And I'm excited to be able to bring it to people at my public events, and seeing it happen all over social media, because I feel like everyone has a very personal way of looking at the paranormal. So there's different ways of interpreting the paranormal, and who's to say you can't learn something totally new from someone from a completely different walk of life and how they approach the subject. So again, the love-hate relationship with social media, but I love seeing different ways of investigating and approaching the paranormal, different tools and tactics. So I love the grassroots movement in the paranormal right now.
Yeah, I like that grassroots movement idea too. And yeah, I have a love-hate thing with social media, probably more than you. And I grew up with letter writing, so it's always going to be a little bit weird for me, especially how much information I learn about people I'll never see. So
Yeah.
I haven't quite gotten over that yet. But going back to now, I lost my train of thought about I was going to say something about what we were talking about with the grassroots. Oh, I wanted to ask you what your favorite tools were when you're
Oh,
investigating.
so for me personally, I'm very simple. I just love a good old-fashioned digital recorder. I'm not gifted in getting photographs. I have never photographed anything ever, so I don't bother with fancy cameras. For me, I don't want to say I'm good at getting EVP, but I just happen to get really good recordings. So for me, I love just a good old fashioned digital recorder. I've upgraded from the tape recorder in Gettysburg. Um, but I love that. And I also have something we call it a deco pod. It's basically a REM pod, but I always joke saying it works a little better. At least for me, I've never had a REM pod work for me, but this guy works. It's the same idea. The antenna, and if you break the field, it lights up. And it's designed by a local team here in Buffalo, and they designed it to look like a light fixture at one of the most haunted locations in our area, which was Art Deco themes, hence the Deco Pod. So those are really my two pieces of equipment. I do also love the SB7 to be able to do the Estes method where you're listening for voices. But that's really it. Like, I don't really have anything really impressive. I know a lot of people, it's kind of like a competition to see who can have the best gadgets or the most equipment. And for me, I'm always like, I just want my digital recorder and like maybe a Polaroid camera just to be able to like snap some pictures. But so for me, I'm definitely simpler, I feel. Um, so I did just recently build myself a spirit portal, which I hate the title. I call it a spirit radio now because I've learned on public ghost hunts people don't like the word portal, especially if they're in a dark room in a haunted location. So we call it a spirit radio now. And I just recently built myself one. So I also love that because it's like my baby. I didn't have to spend $1,000 on it. um, but yeah, I would say SB7 digital recorder and then my little deco pod. I love them.
So, what is a spirit portal or a spirit radio?
So basically, how it works is you take the SB7, which sweeps through radio waves at basically a fraction of a second. So it goes, and the theory behind that is that the spirits can use that white noise to manifest their voice, and you can hear answers to questions. So what the portal does is basically you plug it into a guitar noise gate pedal, which cancels out that white noise, and only the voices come through. So it just makes it easier to hear potential voices. I'm trying it out tonight at my public event for the very first time, so fingers crossed, it's good. But I've done investigations, public events in the past where people have had them, and I've always wanted one. But the price tag online is just, I don't have $1,000 to spend on something. So my husband and I just kind of investigated it a little bit. He's a musician, so he totally understood how, the noise gate and the reverb pedals, how those would work, and super easy. I've actually shared it with other people because I don't want them to spend $1,000 either. So I'm all about like not gatekeeping the paranormal at all. So if you have the tools to be able to build something or expand the knowledge in some way, like you might as well share it. I don't know, I'm not going to make money off of it, so here you go. So that's basically how a portal works. Basically just a glorified spirit box or SB7 that just takes out that awful noise, making it a little bit easier to understand what's going on. Sometimes it works, sometimes you still have no idea what's being said, unfortunately.
Do you think that now EVPs seem to be very consistently popular with all investigators, and recording does seem to be a little more maybe verifiable because it's one of those things where with camera work it can be dust or something else, or people can also, create something that's not there. I suppose they could with their recording too. But my impression from talking to different paranormal people is a lot of people really like that part. Our friend Jeff, who was on the show, he's really big, and he's got his own system with audio recording because he's a musician. So, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I kind of feel the same way that, whenever someone shows me a video or a photo, I immediately turn into a skeptic, because especially with nowadays with editing software, and it's so easy to fake something if you're, on one end of the spectrum. But even, so many times it could be dust, it could be moisture, it could be a bug. So I think there's always so many different ways to explain something caught on camera. Whereas if you have this recording, and again, I've gotten some amazing EVPs, in my opinion, that are great, that I share it with other people, and they say, oh, well, it could be this, 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 and this. And I like immediately take offense, like, how dare you? But for me, especially if you are present, and no one was talking at this point, there was no bang, there was nothing to interfere with this, and you hear a voice or an intelligent response, to me that's just fascinating, especially when you don't hear it with your own ears, but you catch it on this recorder. That's the para of the paranormal. Like, we don't understand why this is happening, and who knows, maybe 100 years from now there's a very logical explanation. We just don't understand it right now. But for me, EVP is just the most fascinating thing. And again, that's what I tend to catch, is EVP. So of course I'm going to gravitate towards it because I understand it the most, and I kind of almost feel like a connection to it because that's the only thing I've ever caught. And even then, they're few and far between. I feel like if you're ever, watching a show or with someone and they say, oh yeah, I've caught, 5,000 EVPs over the last year, you think, probably not. That's, it happens, but I don't think it's as common as people think. And a lot of times it could be static, it could be something electrical. But again, if you have those intelligent responses, or you can actually make out words, it's absolutely fascinating to me, far more than a photograph, because I feel like in the 21st century, Photoshop and any sort of editing software is so easy to fabricate something. Unfortunately, you have to look at everything nowadays with a very skeptical eye, because you don't know if someone's being honest or not.
It's true. The only thing is that I have with my cell phone, I'm sort of like, as a hobby, I do a lot of photography, and I've twice caught, it wasn't really a ghost, but I was on my porch. I do a lot of mantras there, and the incense started forming all these crazy forms. It was like in the middle of the day. So I started taking pictures of them, and I've never had that. I mean, I've been doing mantras on my porch forever, and you can see, like, there's a clear heart, there are these weird creatures, and I was like, but I know I was there, and I just posted it for my friends, and then someone else sent me one that does a lot of like meditation, and they also had it with their incense. But I agree with you in that you can't really trust, unfortunately, what people show you. So you have to know the person and know that they're just an honest person. But I'm fascinated by the EVPs. And the only other thing I always wonder is, could we be possibly catching voices from parallel universes? Because I believe in that. I like
a whole other can of worms.
It's like, so how do I tell the difference? I mean, obviously you try to like connect to the location, and if the name of the person, that makes sense to me. But then again, that's just my own curiosity. Wouldn't that be cool if it's another reality?
I mean, there's been a couple times where like I've had like these debates with people, and like we get into it and we're like, this is like, we are down the rabbit hole right now. We need to back away.
So, because it's all possible. But certainly there can be very unusual things that, if nothing else, you can't explain. You can say, well, what is this? And when so many people, and I agree with you about the exaggeration. Unfortunately, that seems to be part of the history of the occult, exaggeration and lies. And I don't know why, but a lot of, like the Golden Dawn started on a lie with this manuscript, and yet they are an authentic group. So this tendency to kind of exaggerate or downright
Even
lie.
like the Fox sisters with spiritualism. It's like, well, they were fabricating these wrappings, but they started the spiritualism movement, which is still happening today. So I almost feel like there's always a basis of truth there, but it might not be as impressive, quote unquote, or as eye catching. So you have to exaggerate it or build up to it just to get the attention that these things possibly deserve or you want for it. I don't know. It's interesting because for the Feminine Macabre Volume 2, that's actually going to be my piece, is how kind of pranks and fabrications in the paranormal have led to actual movements and groups and things. So it's interesting that you said that. It was a nice little synchronicity for me.
Oh, that's cool. You're currently accepting submissions too for the second issue, right?
Yeah, so anyone who's watching, we opened it up also to anyone who identifies as non-binary. So if you identify as female or non-binary, submissions are open until June 1st. And anything paranormal, like I mentioned, witchcraft and tarot, folklore, death culture, ghosts, cryptids, anything like that. And if you go to spookeats.com/feminine macabre, that's where all of the submission guidelines are. So you can go there. We've also opened it up to artists. So a few people who use artwork in their mediumship have asked. So we've also opened it up to artists as well. So I would love to see what people come up with. We're hoping to expand it. So we had 30 accepted pieces last time, so we'll see how many we get this time.
That's awesome. And you're also on Instagram. That's another easy place to find you, and you have all the links there at Spook Eats, I think is your name on Instagram.
Yes, nice and easy.
Yes, nice and easy. So we're getting a little closer to the end. We have about 8 minutes. Is there anything you would sort of advise people that want to get involved in the paranormal? We'd like to ask the people that are involved, like, what would you advise people interested in getting involved in investigating, or even just parts of group that investigate? What is your advice?
My number one piece of advice is to just go for it. I feel like so many times people hem and haw and think about, investigating or, buying this piece of equipment and going out there. And my advice is to just do it. Don't wait until the right moment. Don't wait. Just don't wait. A lot of people wait until they're older or they've lost a loved one. And I feel like, again, the paranormal belongs to everyone. So, don't let the gatekeeping intimidate you. Don't let people's years of experience intimidate you. Just go out and do it. You have nothing to lose. And the other bit of advice I would always say is be respectful. Be respectful of the location, whether that means trespassing or not. Don't do it, it's illegal. Being respectful of the living, the people who own these locations, or family members that have lost loved ones. If you're investigating a location of a recent tragedy, make sure you're respectful of the people who are still very much grieving and still left behind, and be respectful of the dead. Whether you're at a cemetery or in a location, these spirits were once people, and I would hope that you would speak to them the way that you would like to be spoken to. So be respectful and then just go for it. Again, you have nothing to lose and you have so much to gain. I've gained so many new friends, so many new experiences. I don't want to say like I've expanded my way of thinking, but I really have. Like, I look at the world in like a freaky deaky little way now, and I love it. And it's always expanding, it's always growing, it's always changing and always evolving. So anyone who's listening who is considering, investigating the paranormal, I really hope that you do it. Don't be too intimidated by it. It is very intimidating. Yeah, just do it. Just do it.
I don't know if I was intimidated, but I would, go along with my friends. So we got invited to David Oman's house years ago, and he really pushed that we do a seance, and because we do cards for a living, we believe in the afterworld, but we were not into it. And our friends drew us in, and it was just because of their passion and their interest. And So I didn't even really try to take recordings or do anything until recently. I was like, so maybe I'll try this on my phone, and it is really it's fun to participate even a little bit. It's fun. You don't really think of it as a social outing per se, but it really is a good social outing. And depending on where you are, certainly some places can be, like you said, physically dangerous. You have to be careful for old buildings and you don't get hurt and there's no light. But I like that aspect of it. I also really like what you said about respecting the dead and talking to them the way you would want to, because you see sometimes on the shows, especially, again, it might be for drama, but it's like, dude,
don't do that.
Don't do that. That's just so rude.
Yeah.
So maybe having a little manners is not such a bad thing with the dead. So I like that. And you were saying how it's changed your view, and I was going to ask you that. Do you think your views about the afterlife have grown and deepened? Is there anything particular that you can remember that now you really feel strongly about that you didn't before you started investigating?
Oh gosh, I mean, so much. Again, I grew up where if you were good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. And there's no such thing as ghosts. And if they are, they're the devil and they're evil. And I don't think that anymore. I think it's so much more complicated than that, but in a good way. And I mean, I have so many like new theories and new ideas and stuff. But my biggest thing that I've kind of come to accept, I guess, is like my rule, like the rule of three. But my rule of three is, everything comes in trios, whether it's, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or water, ice, and steam. There's always these trios. And for me, it's the body, the soul, and the spirit. I feel like when you die, the body, I mean, it's your meat suit, so it's done. It goes to the ground, or you burn it, or whatever. Then you have the soul, which I feel like is returned either to the universe or comes back around again, or goes to heaven if that's what it is. And then you have the spirit, which I feel like that is kind of what remains, whether it's in a residual form or an intelligent form, whether it clings to a family member or a location. And again, I'm still always tweaking this idea and this theory, but for me, with my brother is the biggest example. I have felt him near me so many times. I know other people that have experienced him. So for me, I have a hard time accepting that once you're dead, like you're gone, whether it's oblivion or heaven or whatever. No, he's still very much a part of my life. It's still very much here, interacting and kind of like peeking through the veil of sorts every so often. So I mean, my view of the afterlife is constantly changing, and it's done a complete 180 from when I was a child. And for that, I'm actually very grateful. It never sat well with me, the whole heaven, hell, Sunday school way of thinking. So in a way, I'm very grateful to the paranormal for kind of introducing new ways of possibly thinking and experiencing the afterlife.
That's a wonderful way to sort of end the show today. I love that. It's really remarkable that you were open to changing too, because it isn't easy sometimes to change, even when we're shown a different way in life. And I think that the paranormal can do that for people and give us a sense of hope that we continue in some form. And I agree with you. I don't know how it all works, and I tweak my own ideas, but at this point, 100%, something of me is going on. Hopefully the better part. I think it's the whole thing, though.
That's what makes it interesting. The whole thing, not just the good.
Not just the good. Yeah, no, the whole thing goes. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really enjoyable talking to you. And everyone go visit her at spookeats.com, spookeats.com. There's all kinds of links to her books and her journal and the places she's been to. I think you'll really enjoy her website too. It's a really great website. So thank you, Amanda, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a great week.